Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin session 8-1. The moderator will be Mr. Bernhard Seiliger, who is the representative of Seidel Foundation Korea office. I would like to turn it over to Mr. Seiliger.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here with you to discuss in the next 1.5 hours the climate crisis and inter-Korean agricultural cooperation. One of our presenters is with us, and one of our presenters is with us online. Dr. Kim, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Dr. Kim?
네, 잘 들립니다.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful, that's great. So I'm first of all very pleased that our good partner, the Nongotson Yongwon Rural Research Institute, assembled this very important panel. We have a number of renowned experts for presentation and discussion, and we have a topic which is really very important. The World Food Programme in 2018 did their last regular survey of the food situation in North Korea, and it had a 3% malnourishment rate. Now, after 3 years of Corona crisis, they think the malnourishment rate is at more than 70%. So we have a dramatic situation, again, in the food security sector. We have then effects of climate change. We have all the micro disasters of North Korea. Again, when we had a lot of rain here, it was not easy for here, and even some people tragically died. But in North Korea, the effects were probably much stronger, and they affect also the harvest. So we have many issues to discuss. We have two presenters first. Dr. KANG from the Korea Environment Institute talking about inter-Korean environmental cooperation as a co-response to the climate risk, and Dr. Kim, now in his office, I guess, or at his home office, on the trend and situation of agricultural infrastructure policy under Kim Jong-un. I would ask our presenters to speak around 20 to 25 maximum minutes. And then we have 3 discussants, which also will join us with their comments for around 7 to 10 minutes, namely Dr. Kwon from the GS&J Institute, senior economist, Dr. Lee from the KRIS, Korea Research Institute for Human Settlements, and finally Professor Jo from IDE, from Ivas Women University. So, thank you everybody for coming, and I would say we start with your presentation, Dr. Kang, please.
네, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much.
네, 소개받은 강태구라고 합니다.
As introduced, my name is Kang Taek-gu.
기후위기 대응 남북한 협력.
Today I'm going to talk about the inter-Korean cooperation on climate change response.
요즘 이제 기후 변화, 기후 이런 얘기들을 많이 하는데
Nowadays, we talk a lot about climate change and climate crisis, but rather than focusing on that aspect,
그런 점에서 기후 위기라는 표현을 좀 써봤고요.
I would like to use the word climate crisis.
북한의 대응들이 하는
So I'm going to talk about the current state of North Korea in responding to climate crisis and what are some areas of potential cooperation in this area between the two countries. And I'm also going to talk about how we can further this cooperation going forward.
잘 아시겠지만 이번 이제 윤석열
As you're aware, with the new Yoon's administration, inter-Korean ground détente was presented as an inter-Korean policy. So climate issue has become a very important keyword in the policy initiative. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the environment and the climate sector as the area of cooperation between the two countries. We're going to have a look at the past situation, the present, and how we can further develop our cooperation going forward. There are some characteristics relating to DPRK's response to climate change or climate crisis. For example, there is a change of awareness among the leadership. So with Kim Jong-un's arrival, there is an increasing awareness on the seriousness of climate change. So in September 2021, there was an extended meeting of the Political Bureau of the Workers' Party, and it was mentioned that there is a deep concern for the climate extreme weathers, and North Korea is also exposed to that kind of risk. And there has been a lot of emphasis on responding to natural disasters like drought and flood. And a lot of focus is also placed on reforestation. Kim said that he wants to make North Korean mountains into gold. And there is an emphasis on science and technology. So North wants to leverage science and technology to overcome environmental difficulties. There are also relevant laws and regulations that are put in place. In 2014, North adopted the Disaster Prevention and Rescue Recovery Act. From 2019 to 30, there is the National Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy. And although it is not a permanent committee, there is a state committee on emergencies and disaster and crisis management. As for the committee, there are different names that are being mentioned, and that is why I wrote "or" as the committee name. So we're not really clear about the exact name of the committee, but there is a committee on emergencies and disasters. There are overarching acts and laws, but they also need to have to implement. So it is important to also develop frameworks to implement these acts. I would like to also talk about energy, how DPRK is working to address energy issues as well. In 2013, North enacted the Renewable Energy Law to promote the development and use of solar, wind, geothermal, and renewable energy. In 2014, there was the mid to long-term Renewable Energy Act, a plan that was established. So it wants to expand the generation capacity to 5 million kilowatts by 2044. So making wind represent 50% of its power consumption. So as you can see, North is faced with the energy crisis, and they are also placing a lot of importance in energy sufficiency. And there are also possibilities of reducing our carbon emissions. So the North is also working towards that end as well. But because of the sanctions and COVID-19, it is very difficult to drastically increase or expand renewable energy. So there is the HS code, which is related with the photovoltaic-related electronic devices. So as for the HS code 85, that is the relevant electrical appliance, but it is considered as an item banned from being exported to North Korea according to the UN resolution. So North internally is trying to expand its renewable energy deployment, but there are limitations and constraints. Although there are efforts relating to legislation, despite all of these efforts, the SOEs are very weak, and the infrastructure is lacking. Whenever we talk about natural disasters and climate change or disasters in North Korea, we often employ the word vicious cycle. So I can say that there is a frequent occurrence of natural disasters, and because of lack of infrastructure, floods also become very frequent. So that leads to deforestation, leading to food insecurity, and because of flood, a lot of infectious disease or contagious diseases flourish, and that leads to a lot of other health concerns. And in 2021, DPRK submitted voluntary national review, VNR. So VNR is about the voluntary review of the country, of the state, regarding their SDG goals. So inside this report, you can find you can actually read that North Korea is very much committed to reducing CO2 emissions, much more than expected if there is an international assistance or aid. So this is the current situation by type of natural disaster and by region. It is based on my former research. So in 1990s and in 2000s were the coverage of my study, scope of my study. So we used the information given by the North media and the South media and international media. So it goes from 1990s to 2010. And you can see there is an increasing trend of natural disasters taking place in North Korea. By type, lots of torrential rain, flood, typhoons, and yellow dust. And if you look at the upper right image, there is the map of North Korea. Gangwon province, Hwanghae-do, all of these areas are very prone to disasters. This map is provided by a private institute in the US. So it's an outlook for climate crisis. So on the left is rice, and on the right it's maize. So it's change in probability of crop yield failures by 2030. So I don't see the time period here, but I think it's from 2021 to 2040. So how much the yield will decline. So you can see that in the West Sea, it's very red. So this means that going forward, there is going to be a decline in the yield of rice and maize in North Korea. So it's an outlook, an estimation. Now, I'd like to talk about the international response to the climate crisis in North Korea. So, North Korea joined UNFCCC in 1994, and in 2012, they submitted a national report on climate change. And they also submitted reports in collaboration with UNEP. And in 2016 and 2019, DPRK submitted the National Determined Contributions, NDC. And 2021, as mentioned before, DPRK submitted a voluntary national review talking about its, which includes its goals about the SDG. So North Korea says that by 2030, it's going to reduce 15.63% of its CO2 emissions compared to baseline, and with international assistance up to 50.34%. So it says according to or compared to the baseline BAU, but I could not really find what was their bench or reference year. So we don't know based on which reference year, but they said that compared to the baseline, by 2030, they will reduce CO2 emissions by 15.63%. And you can see that North Korea has increased its NDCs in 2021 compared to the previous years. So these are some of the characteristics regarding the inter-Korean environmental cooperation. There are lots of text here, but let me keep it short. Let me summarize a little bit. So the inter-Korean environmental cooperation remains at a very low level. It doesn't have a long history. The first cooperation began in 1991. So after the inter-Korean framework agreement, actually both Koreas agreed to collaborate on environment in only 2000. And the relevant discussions kicked off truly in 2007. And there were also vice ministerial meeting that took place, but it only took place for just once. So it didn't continue. So there are not substantial outcomes in terms of intergovernmental, so interstate. cooperation between the two Koreas in the field of environment. So a lot of the environmental cooperation was focused on the DMZ area, so regarding the shared rivers and also for forest insect control. And if you look at the situation of North Korea these days, they tend to prefer a cooperation with not Korea, but with the international community, and that is why it has voluntarily submitted the VNR to achieve the SDGs, and it has also built a national framework to implement CDM projects. And it actually submitted 8 CDM project proposals to UN in 2015, and some of that are related with hydropower. So North Korea is very keen on undertaking these hydropower-related CDM projects. Now let me talk about the domestic environment of North Korea. So SDGs is a global trend, and there is actually a lack of plan to further promote inter-Korean cooperation in terms of achieving SDG. I mentioned that North Korea submitted the VNR in 2021, and North Korea outlined in this report what plans that they have to achieve SDG, and you can say that DPRK wants to collaborate or join the international community's effort in achieving SDG. But as for South Korea, we have the inter-Korean basic cooperation framework, but I believe that there are some elements lacking in terms of achieving SDG together with North Korea. Of course, the current government is trying to initiate efforts under the slogan of grande détente. But since we cannot put aside the political and military issues as well, and as they are always considered as a placed top on the agenda, the environmental cooperation still remains limited. So you can see that in terms of inter-Korean environmental cooperation, these efforts have been ongoing since 1991 up until now, and in the areas of climate, air pollution, ecosystem, and so forth. So you can see that a lot of works were done in 2007, as you can see a lot of numbers by area here. But in other areas or other years, there was sufficient lack of cooperation. So what kind of things do we need to consider in promoting inter-Korean cooperation on climate and environment? These are some of the recommendations that I summed up. So first, is we have to develop projects or programs that cater to the needs of North Korea based on the mutual interest of both parties. And of course, the VNR report is not the Holy Grail or the Holy Bible, but VNR outlines the needs and the requirements of North Korea. So I think that we have to be very keen on this report and try to identify and develop programs that could fit North Korea's situation. As for the Sustainable Development Goals, there are dozens of these goals. And North Korea also included the so National Development Goals, NDGs, and they presented their national development goals in the report. The contents are very roughly written, and the specifics are missing, but we can still consider those requirements because the PRK included those national development goals inside this report. So we really have to have a look at this report to clearly identify what North Korea needs and how these needs can also be serve both the interests of both parties. And we can also think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by making investments. After investing in North Korea, we can maybe recognize the greenhouse gas emissions reduced from these projects as South Korea's NDCs. That could be another possibility, but it is very difficult for the time being. So how we're going to consider the inter-Korean transactions and deals, and if these can be also recognized as the NDCs, this requires a very careful approach. So I will elaborate more on that if we have time later on. South Korea also launched its 2050 net zero vision, and Japan, US, and other European countries are very keen on achieving net zero. So net zero or carbon neutrality and sustainable development concept should be fully adopted in the Inter-Korean Cooperation Plan. We also have to be aligned with the global dynamics, international dynamics, when implementing these type of cooperation. If we focus too much on improving inter-Korean relations, so we have to think about whether improving drastically the inter-Korean relations ahead of the improving of global dynamics it will be adequate for the time being. So I'm going to elaborate this point later on. So these are some of the cooperative measures that we can pursue going forward. So there have been projects that were agreed upon by both countries up until now. So there are some examples here. There was one in 2007, that's like 15 years ago. So there was like working level consultative meeting in the areas of medical and healthcare and environment protection. And there was a working level meeting and working level group meeting on Inter-Korean Forest Corporation. So all of these meetings and talks need to be resumed. And some proposals to further develop our cooperation. I would like to propose the establishment of a Northeast Asia cooperative mechanism on climate crisis. So that would involve Northeast Asian countries. So it will be a multi-regional, multilateral mechanism to respond to climate crisis. And I believe that this will allow North Korea to also join the international community's efforts in this area. But what is important here is the commitment of North Korea or to join the international community, the decision of North Korea to do so. I don't know what kind of help we can give to North Korea to make up their minds, but we really have to think about how they can decide on joining the international community. Next proposal or recommendation is that we have to identify projects or programs that is very much based on North Korea's demand or requirement. So in the Vienna report, North Korea actually adjusted the SDGs to NDGs. So NDGs is their national development goals. So DPRK says these are our NDGs and we're going to do this and that to achieve our NDGs. So we have to have a look at North's NDGs and seek areas that would require help. So we have to seek cooperative measures that can help North Korea to achieve their sustainable development goals. And last but not least is that within South Korea, we also have to make efforts to revisit relevant policies and institutions. If you look at the past cooperation, it was very much focused on the economic aspects. But if you take a mid to long-term perspective, of course, we cannot completely exclude the economic aspects. But we also have to incorporate more the concepts of SDGs. We have to go for a more comprehensive approach in pursuing inter-Korean cooperation. So we have to work towards achieving the sustainable development goals for the entire Korean Peninsula and also seek ways to achieve net zero. We really need to develop relevant laws and frameworks to make that possible. And last but not least, I think that there is a discussion going on regarding this proposal, but there is a plan also to unveil the fourth inter-Korean relationship development basic plan. So if we are to work on developing this plan, we have to make sure that the sustainability or sustainable environment of the Korean Peninsula is mainstreamed in this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's,
네, 감사합니다. 네,
perfect.
감사합니다.
Also, time-wise, very important topics you discussed. Among them, how to establish a Northeast Asian energy, a renewable energy mechanism. We have the NEASPEC, which is something like that, which tries this, where North Korea is a member. But as you pointed out, the most important difficulty is really to get North Korea at the table. That's really the big difficulty. This is the one side, the international side. And then we have the national side, the question, how does North Korea do itself? And now we hear from Dr. Kim about infrastructure development, because obviously there's no agricultural development without infrastructure. Please, Dr. Kim, and I will want also to convey from all the audience here all our best wishes for your health.
네, 안녕하십니까. 한국농어촌공사 농어촌연구원.
Hello, as introduced, my name is Kim Hyuk. I'm a researcher at the Korea Rural Community Corporation Rural Research Institute. So, I would like to extend my appreciation to all the moderator, and as well as the presenters and discussants and attendees that I could not be there physically. So, I will share my PowerPoint slides now. Can you see my slides? The topic of my presentation is, as you can see on the screen. But before I begin, my voice is croaking a bit, so I would like to ask for your understanding with that. So the topic of my presentation is the recent developments of agricultural-based policies in the Kim Jong-un era. I'm going to talk about some of its successes as well as failures. So it will begin with an introduction about North Korea's economic management improvement measures. So that was one of the key policies of the Kim Jong-un regime in its initial stage. And the agricultural-based policy, I'm going to talk about its recent developments. So I'm going to talk about the recent or the current status of it. And I'm also going to talk about the limitations of North Korea's agriculture-based policy. So the questions are as follows. How has North Korea's agriculture-based policy changed? What are the recent developments of this policy? And what is its current status and limitations? So those are the three main topics of my presentation. So back in 2010, when Kim Jong-un took power, one of his focus was on economic management. And if I were to talk about the background a bit, because of currency reform, the value of the won decreased, the market activity decreased, and prices rose back in 2009. And against this backdrop, many of the economic activities also decreased and were damaged. So in 2011, Kim Jong-un instructed that North Korea comes up with measures to improve economic management. And in 2012, he established a permanent committee to come up with economic management measures. And the key here is to come up with ways for institutional improvement to address food issues. And this issue was once again emphasized in April 2012 in Kim Jong-un's public speech. You know that famous phrase, "I will make sure that the people will never have to tighten their belts again." So we see that people probably expected that Kim Jong-un's economic management measures will bring many improvements. So we also have back in 2014 the May 30th measure, and also during the 7th Party Congress in 2016, Kim Jong-un emphasized the implementation of, quote, "our style of economic management," and he ordered that the field responsibility system takes place. And during the 8th Party Congress, the 5-year economic development plan was announced, which emphasized the organic relations between metal, chemistry, and agriculture. Now, metal means machinery, chemical means fertilizer. So those two areas, once they are linked closely with the agricultural industry, will be able to enhance productivity greatly, is what Kim Jong-un thought. And he also emphasized spurring the revolution in seed selection, establishing scientific farming system, increasing productivity for low-yielding land, campaign to bring more land under cultivation, and expanding mechanization. And he also emphasized building a new, quote, socialist agricultural society, which was emphasized during the Kim Il-sung era back in 1964 in February. This was actually the thesis of the plenary meeting back then. So again, Kim Jong-un emphasizes this socialist agriculture society as a decree or protocol for the regime. And they also outline the priorities and tactics to address agricultural issues. During the 4th plenary meeting of the 8th Central Committee, they emphasized that agricultural issues must be resolved first and foremost. The reason why they emphasized resolving the issue of agriculture is because their efforts to boost up production of agriculture did not yield a good result. So between So at a time when Kim Jong-un announced its first 5-year economic development plan, there was not much of a production yield. And back in 2021, which is the first year of Kim Jong-un's second 5-year plan, the first year's yield was only 4.69 million tons. So during the plenary session, they emphasized the 3 revolutions, changing the grain production structure and improving low-yielding land. Those are the key. The 3 revolutions are revolutions in people and also ideology and culture. So the 3 revolutions were emphasized. And second, as I mentioned before, Kim Jong-un emphasized that it should change the grain production structure, which focused on corn and so on, but it should now be focused more on barley and wheat. And he also emphasized improving low-yielding land. There are many low-yielding land in North Korea, and hence they ought to be improved. So these are something that are new, but they were just once again emphasized during the plenary meeting of the 8th Central Committee. And also emphasized were state investment in realizing the irrigation, mechanization, chemicalization, and electrification of the rural economy. Now, mechanization is linked to the metal industry, as I said before. So mechanized means that they ought to take measures to make sure that machine is used in all aspects of its agricultural activities, and chemicalization, as I said before, refers to fertilizers. And one notable thing is that Kim Jong-un chose the South Hwanghae province as an area of priority to serve as a model for other areas. Now, the Hwanghae province takes up 25.8% of North Korea's land. It's a big agricultural acreage. And there are many farms and farmlands within the area. So therefore, North Korea put priority on South Hwanghae province so as to make it into a model agricultural area for the rest of the nation. And in January 2021, the permanent committee was upgraded to an agricultural committee under the Ministry of Agriculture, and this shows its willingness to reinforce the agricultural guidance system. So the agricultural policy of the Kim Jong-un regime have now been institutionalized with various measures. So Kim Jong-un actually outlined a sub-work team management system as well as the field responsibility system. Actually, the related article to sub-team work-team management was amended back in 2013, and also the individual farm management system was implemented so as to give more autonomy to farmers when it comes to operating their farms, and it also emphasized sub-work team and farmers. In terms of land management, farming process, production plan, purchase plan, spot distribution, and equal distribution of agricultural goods. And last year, the city-county development law was announced. And this was announced through the Rodong Shinmun. And what's notable about this is that it emphasized rural development based on national policy and establishment of a socialist rural system. And it also emphasized the management and the operation of the field responsibility system. And this is all geared towards raising the autonomy of the farmers. Now I'd like to talk about the recent developments of the agricultural-based policy in North Korea and the overall agricultural sector under Kim Jong-un. Most recently, let's take a look at some changes. Between 2018 to 2021, we see some notable trends. Among 2012 cases of Maine changes, I'm going to talk about them break them down into three. Region, technology, and infrastructure, and they're not broken down into details, but the cases or the changes related to regions accounted for 53%, which took up the biggest portion, technology 30%, and infrastructure 17%. So as for regions, it basically refers to technology-based related changes in each provinces, including the Pyongyang and Nampo area. And the technological changes refers to technological elements like seeds, fertilizers, and farming methods. But you can see that the changes in all those three categories are decreasing. If you look at the graph here, it did increase a bit this year, though. So this does not cover the entire areas of North Korea, but we did collect all available data to create this graph and pie chart for us to see what the recent developments are. And this pertains to the agricultural sector, as I said earlier, and we expect to see this trend increasing a bit starting this year, as you can see in the graph. Now let's take a look at the recent developments of the agricultural infrastructure. Irrigation and drainage account for 30%, waterway construction 18%, reclaimed land 15%, and reservoir 15%. So irrigation and drainage involves maintenance, and also waterway construction involves expanding the waterway to secure available water, and also creation of reservoir was emphasized. So between 2020 to 2021, we see many projects that have been completed with regards to these three areas. And North Korea also emphasized the management of a pumping station in preparation of drought, as well as securing land for reclamation, land clearing, and pumping station. Now, in the past, it seems that land clearing took up a lot of the focus of North Korea, but you can see that back in 2021, the land clearing does not take up a big portion. And land clearing, therefore, since 2021, has not taken place in North Korea to a great extent. This actually entails a lot of problems, and I want to emphasize land clearing here is because when we talk about land clearing, it's connected to mechanization. So even when it does clear the land, it needs necessary machines, and the machines require fuel, so as to make sure that they are able to clear land efficiently and to separate them into zones. But such efforts have hardly been carried out since 2020, and I believe that this is closely linked to North Korea's relationship with the outside world. Now, let's look at agricultural technology. So basically, farming supplies like seeds and fertilizer take up 47%, and others account for 45%. The others are ones that indirectly affect the agricultural technology, and that accounts for 45%. And agriculture structure against climate change accounts for 5%, and increased interest in rural development, 3%. Now, when it comes to seed management or diversified farming, the interest in these two areas dropped a bit in 2019. And in 2020, the agricultural supplies and also diversified farming were emphasized. But, of course, North Korea is beginning to show less interest in them as well. And North Korea also built the Agriculture Institute's Fruit Research Center, the Corn Research Institute, and Farm Produce Research Institute. Now, going into regional developments, South Pyongan Province, North Pyongan Province, and South Hwanghae Province were the ones that showed highest level of development. And if you look at them, if you break them into time, in 2020, that was the last year of the 5-year economic development plan, and therefore there was an emphasis on large-scale regional innovation. So 2020 is marked in green in the graph, and once again, emphasis was placed on large-scale regional innovation compared to other years. This means that North Korea put in a lot of efforts to make sure that its goal of the 5-year economic development plan is met. And if you look at the current status of the agricultural-based policy and its outcomes, I compared both South and North Korea together. First, I compared the farming acreage. And you can see that North Korea has bigger farming acreage in North Korea. But when it comes to plain area, South Korea has more plain area, but when it comes to farming area, North Korea has more. And when it comes to paddy field, South Korea has more, but when it comes to dry field, North Korea has more. And these lands are used for various purposes. 72% of North Korea's rice paddies are reservoirs. And so 160,000 hectares are the partially irrigated paddy fields. And also, pumping stations account for 460,000 hectares. And this includes both paddy and dry fields. That accounts for 24% but here in South Korea, the pumping station account for 17.4 million hectares. But that accounts for 25.5% in terms of South Korea. And in terms of weir, we don't know the exact scale of weir in North Korea, but that accounts for 15.7% of North Korea's farming acreage, whereas in South Korea, we do have the exact figure. The weir takes up 50,000 hectares. And if we look at the use of North Korea's agricultural water, the use of water for North Korea is 7.13 billion tons, whereas it's around 3 billion tons for South Korea. If you look at the utilization structure and infrastructure, 43% is reservoir, 39% pumping station, 15.7% intake weir, and 2.3% discharge water and others. And North Korea is continuing to decrease its use of pumping station as related constructions that can supplement the pumping station is being held. Now, North Korea is greatly interested in climate change issue or climate crisis, as Professor KANG put it. From 1991 to 2020, the average annual temperature was 8.9 degrees Celsius. That was a 0.4 degrees Celsius increase annually in average. And in the same period, the annual average rainfall was 912 millimeters, 543.2 millimeters in summer, and 444 millimeters in July and August. So there was a concentration of rainfall. And if you look at North Korea's drought, the period of drought, which was previously 34 months, was reduced to 11 months. And this will also be discussed, I'm sure, further in the discussion session, because I know that the institutions here that they represent actually conduct related researches. But we do know that although the drought season has been reduced, it is repeatedly occurring in North Korea, and there are flood damages in the west coast. There's a maximum rainfall of 200 to 300 millimeters per day, and there is a repetition between flood damage and also a 60-day long drought in the west coast area. And I'm talking about the agricultural region when I talk about the west coast. And there is also the long-distance irrigation system issue. North Korea's irrigation canal across the country is about 4,648 kilometers long, which is only 6.67% of South Korea. The issue is that there is a high water loss rate because North Korea is based on earthen canal. So these water loss actually occur due to the long irrigation canal that is made of earth, which is a big difference between North Korea and South Korea. And basically, the facilities in North Korea is very poor. Given we can see this when we think about the water loss rate or the water use rate between the two Koreas that is based on the irrigation canal. And there is also a large volume reservoir problem in Pyongan Province and North Hwanghae Province. The dependency rate on reservoirs that is over 100 million tons is about 60 to 80%. But the thing is, as I said before, a large-scale irrigation actually leads to high level of water loss because of permeation and evaporation. But in South Korea, we have a total of 17,106 reservoirs, and only 78% of them is less than 10 tons. And there are only 8.7% of reservoirs that are over 200,000 tons to 1 million tons. And these actually directly affect the paddy fields and rice fields. And because of large volume reservoir, Unlike the mountainous areas, the West Coast actually has a lot of plains. So here, instead of large volume reservoirs, an independent small-scale reservoir would be more advantageous. And there is also the problem that North Korea depends largely on its pumping station. North Korea has 23,000 pumping stations across the country, which takes up 39% of the irrigation system. But the pump's rate of operation is falling, and this is partially due to lack of electricity supply. I'm sorry. But as I said before, the number of pumping stations is decreasing in North Korea. Or we can say that its level of dependence is decreasing. But if we just look at the pumping station facilities alone, they're seriously obsolete, that even those in operation face a lot of problems. I say they're obsolete because they are Russia-made facilities that were built back in 1970s to 90s. So there are a lot of problems with regards to precision and durability, and they're broken down very often. North Korea has to procure and produce the parts for the pumping stations alone, and turbine blades and copper coil are part of the problem. And so there is a problem related to precision and durability. At a time when North Korea needs a lot of water for farming, the fact that the pumping stations have problems means that it's wreaking havoc on North Korea's agricultural activities. Now, let me summarize my presentation. So Kim Jong-un regime proclaimed that it will make sure that the people don't have to tighten their belts anymore. And therefore, it institutionalized the sub-work team management system, individual farm management system, and responsible farming system. And it also conducted an all-out implementation of our style of economic management, expanded the field responsibility system. And it also introduced policies that would introduce necessary infrastructure and technologies to increase production. However, compared to the performance, the agricultural infrastructure puts realistic limitations on the production in North Korea. And in other words, agricultural-based systems need to be renovated and improved. Otherwise, North Korea will not be able to increase its agricultural production. And this year, due to drought and heavy rainfall, decline in crop production seems inevitable. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. Provided us with a host of data, which is very useful, I think, for the further discussion here. And now we come to our three discussants. I'm not sure, did you make up among yourself who will start? I think we just start with Dr. Kwon. Is that okay for you?
예, 저는 GSNJ에서 일을 하고 있는.
Hello, I am Kwon Tae-jin from GSNJ Institute.
아침 그 노동신문에 의하면은
According to 노동신문 today,
지금 11호 태풍 지금
the Hannamno new typhoon
5일 밤에서
would hit North Korea sometime night on the 5th or morning of 6th, because it's going to pass the east side of Ulleungdo Island, and in the Hwanghae-bukdo province and Hwanghae-gamdo province and Kaesong and parts of Gangwon-do province will be affected by this storm or typhoon. And 노동신문 says that everybody should be careful. It is not a recent thing that North Korea is suffering from a lot of natural disasters. And last year and this year, it's suffering from a lack of water and drought. And just recently, there were torrential rain which inundated the Taedong River and the Amnok River. So all of these areas were affected recently. So every year, once or twice, North Korea is affected by a big climate change. And I think that this situation will worsen in the future. And despite all that,
자체적으로 예방을 한다든지
North Korea
피해를 줄 수 있는 그런
did not
모습은
make full efforts
아닙니다.
to prevent the situation. So what this means is that international cooperation is a must. If we don't work together around the world, North Korea would fail to respond to climate change or climate crisis in the future. So with the arrival of Kim Jong-un from 2012 to 2016, North Korea, well, indeed, tried to better its agricultural sector. It did implement agricultural reform. I believe that this kind of reform is to open up its economy, but at the time, the policy reforms were very much focused on institutional improvements. But the reforms were implemented, but the opening of the economy did not happen. I think that is the issue. So that is why North Korea, to achieve substantial results or achievement of its reform, it has to work with the international community to attract foreign capital and attract foreign goods. So as a means to respond to climate change and what kind of preparations we need to make in the agricultural sector, Mr. Kim did highlight some of the important points, but if all of these two efforts to be aligned with the international community, there should be eased sanctions on North Korea. If the sanctions are not eased, it's very difficult to implement all of the programs that we have in mind. So the issue at hand is, before we kick off the international cooperation, we have to make some preparations. And even though the sanctions ease on North Korea, we should be able to have a phased approach, step-by-step approach. Inter-Korean cooperation in agriculture and climate should be considered as a priority in terms of inter-Korean cooperation, and it is very highly likely that that will be the case. In the past, between the two Koreas, we did cooperate a lot in the agricultural sector. But the problem is that these corporations fail to be consistent and sustained. So we have to prepare for the potential ease of sanctions on North Korea. We have to make preparations to that end. And I would like to provide the following recommendations. Actually, in the past, the inter-Korean cooperation wasn't really aligned with the international norms or international frameworks, and that is why we failed to achieve sustainability of consistency, meaning that back in the days, it felt like the cooperation efforts were paying off, but in the end, it didn't. We had to start from scratch. So, if we were to cooperate further in the future, then the cooperation efforts should be aligned with the international norm so that we can see some substantial outcome and see such cooperation be sustained. That is an important consideration to make. As for myself, with regards to climate change response, I am also doing some research as to how we can promote inter-Korean cooperation in this field. And I think that in about 1 or 2 months' time, I'll be able to make more specific recommendations and proposals. So if we were to have another forum like this, I think I'll be able to share the findings. I just want to let you know that the research is underway. Today we're talking about climate change and also agricultural infrastructure. And generally speaking, the natural disasters, as well as extreme weather conditions, food insecurity, and health crisis, All of that in North Korea, and when we talk about this, we consider it as a new type of security or new security. And the characteristic of this new security is that one element out of all of these elements might not seem very risky, but when all of these elements are put together and combined, the risk will grow exponentially. That is why we have to mitigate this risk in advance so that we can eventually prevent a large disaster. To give you an example, if we face climate change, a lot of natural disasters will occur, and flood is a very serious issue in North Korea. It's also very frequent. So for flood control, what should we do? Up until now, when there was a flood, we would, for example, provide humanitarian assistance to that flooded area. That was about it. But in the future, to prepare for such large-scale disaster, we have to make systematic and organized preparation. To give you an example, if a flood is expected in North Korea, then the weather agencies of both countries can exchange information and collaborate. And our weather information is also large in number, so in South Korea. So maybe we can set up an early warning system for a potential flood in North Korea. So provide an early warning to North Korea in preparation for the flood. And if the flood actually happens and there is damage, there are also areas in which we have to cooperate at the preliminary level, primary level. So of course, like food support and humanitarian support, but in the mid to long term, we have to recover the facilities, recover the arable land. So that would be the scope of cooperation, basic scope of cooperation for flood control and response. But what is important here is that if we want to sustain our cooperation in the field of agriculture, then first and foremost priority is the exchange of information between the experts. And KDI also conducted a KSP program, knowledge sharing program. So it is very important to exchange information and knowledge and expertise to make full preparations for the future. So exchange programs are a must. So that is why in the end, when North Korea opens up its economy and fully takes part in the international community and gets funded by the international community, if that really happens in the future, then all of these discussions taking part among the experts could be useful. The drought situation was very serious, and actually during the Kim Jong-il's era, there was a serious drought in North Korea, and North Korea got concessions to actually build waterways in North Korea. If North Korea hadn't prepared for that in the past, then it could have been much more affected by drought this year or last year. So we have to take into consideration the changes that are taking place in North Korea, and the key here is we have to identify what we can expect and make full preparations to prevent risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwon. And I think it was a very important call also for knowledge sharing in the end. And now we come to Professor Jo's contribution, please.
네, 고맙습니다. 이화여대.
Thank you very much. I am Jo Dong-woo from Ewha University. Thank you very much for inviting me to attend this very meaningful forum and session. I've heard with great interest many insights today. I've heard with great interest the two interesting presentations by very much renowned scholars. I don't think that I would have anything to add to their presentation because their analysis and recommendations were very effective. And one of the things that impressed me from Mr. Kang's presentation is that he said we have to identify programs catering to the needs of North Korea, and we have to incorporate net zero and SDGs concept in our national cooperation framework. And he also mentioned about launching the potential Northeast Asia climate crisis response consultative body. I think these kind of recommendations should be fully taken into account by government. Yoon.
Now, Mr. Kim talked about the changes in North Korea's agriculture-based policy in the Kim Jong-un era. So not long ago in 동아일보, there's a reporter, Chu Sung-ha, who's a North Korean defector. And she actually wrote about Mr. Kim Hyuk, the way he grew up in North Korea when he was young, and his experience of defection, and what an intelligent man he is. And I was very impressed by that article. And likewise, his presentation is also impressive. So I'm not an expert in climate crisis or climate change or agricultural matters. So what I want to do today is how we ought to view the present state so that the suggestions that both presenters made can be realized, so what the government can do going forward. I think it's been about 15 days since we had the National Liberation Day, and in his congratulatory speech, President Yoon Suk-yeol mentioned the audacious initiative, and a few days later, Kim Yo-jong of North Korea criticized the initiative. And in July 27th, North Korea has a day of celebrating the signing of the Armistice Agreement, and Kim Jong-un, for the first time, mentioned President Yoon by his name and strongly criticized him, and that they will not associate with him at all. It's better not to associate with him, and they're not interested in inter-Korean relations. And in early August, I think it was August 10th, North Korea held what is called a National Emergency Quarantine General Assembly, in which Kim Yo-jong said that South Korea is their main enemy and that they will eradicate South Korea. And after that, there was the congratulatory remark made by President Yoon. And afterwards, North Korea basically said that they hate that human being named Yoon Suk-yeol and that they will not associate with South Korea at all. Now, why is that the case? So this is my personal thought. Now, a man and woman dates and they break up and they say, let's never see each other again. But about a week later, the woman calls the man, and the man says, I told you not to call me again, and hangs up. And then another phone call is made a month later and saying, don't you ever call me, and then hangs up. And again, the same thing repeats every month. If you're truly not interested in another person, would you keep calling that person? So in other words, if North Korea is really not interested in South Korea, do you really think they would keep on mentioning South Korea, saying that we're not going to associate with you repeatedly? So I don't have any concrete information backing this up. But given many internal situations in North Korea, it is clear that it's facing economic difficulties. And perhaps North Korea is expecting something from South Korea, that there will be an improvement in inter-Korean relations and U.S.-North Korea relations. That's why they keep throwing all these rhetorics at South Korea. This is a testament to how desperate North Korea is feeling. However, it does not mean that in the near future, North Korea will show up at the negotiation table or a table for dialogue. As you know, North Korea is very proud, and rather than people's livelihoods, the regime, in other words, the maintenance of Kim Jong-un's power is more important.
상당한 정도의 조건이 갖춰지지 않는다면
So unless there are really favorable conditions perceived by North Korea, unless there is a justification to do so, North Korea will not step up to restore inter-Korean relations. Then in that case, how should we formulate our policy towards North Korea?
사항은 사실 그 정부 발표에 의하면은 종합적인
So according to the government, the audacious initiative is a comprehensive package encompassing economy, politics, and military.
이번에 발표가 된 것은 경제 부분에
But only the economic aspect was announced during the
이번에 발표되지 않았고요. 따라서
congratulatory remark in August. The military and political aspects have not been announced, and therefore it's still early for us to judge whether or not the audacious initiative would be effective. But for the initiative to be significant, I would like to throw out some few suggestions. First,
구상이라고 했는데
the government called this the audacious initiative. But is this audacious from the viewpoint of North Korea?
내가 맛있는 거 사줄게.
Now, when you tell someone, I'm going to buy you something really delicious today,
그 사람이 맛있어 할 거를 사줘야 되는 거죠.
you really have to
담대한 것이 나한테
treat them
담대한
with
것이
food
아니라
that they
하나님께
would
담대한
find
거예요.
delicious and not yourself would find delicious. It's the same thing. The audacious initiative has to be seen as audacious by North Korea. In Kim Yo-jong's speech, she criticized that the audacious initiative is just a copy of Vision 3000 of Lee Myung-bak administration. So perhaps that indicates that North Korea does not see the initiative as being very audacious.
북한의 입장에서도 한번 생각을
So
해보면
let's think from North Korea's shoes when we talk about the audacious initiative.
그럼 우리에게는 담대한가?
Then let's think about this. Another question. Is this initiative truly audacious from our point of view? I think it needs two improvements.
무엇을 포기하는 것이
First, what are we giving up, or what kind of concessions are we making to North Korea through this initiative?
양보 포기하라고 이야기를 합니다. 바로
We tell Korea to give up its nuclear program. If North Korea shows sincerity in renouncing its nuclear program or becoming denuclearized, the audacious initiative will be implemented. So we asked North Korea for a concession, but what kind of concessions are we giving to North Korea? We have to think about that.
북한은
Kim Yo-jong
핵을 국채
also said that
나라 그 자체라는 거죠.
its nuclear development program is the North Korean regime itself.
하느냐의 문제라고.
So North Korea's nuclear weapons is a matter of survival for the North Korean regime.
경제 협력은 아무리 경제 지원을 크게 한들
No matter how big a economic assistance is to North Korea, our economy is not going to collapse. So whether we give economic assistance to North Korea or not, it's not going to make a big difference for us. So when we propose to exchange something that determines the very survival of North Korea with something that is not so important to us, it doesn't make sense.
북한이 볼 때 우리 스스로
Therefore,
뭔가 우리도 큰
we have to offer something
다른 것을 좀 생각을
that is truly significant from North Korea's perspective and from our own perspective. And I also hope to see some improvements in the contents of the audacious initiative. So we say we're living in an era of economic social security, but we have always been living in a traditional concept of era, but after the September 11th incident in the United States, we have taken more interested in human security, which includes natural disasters. And now we have entered into an era of neo-security, and now we are entering into an era of economic security.
생산지를 찾아 나가는 그런
Everyone is looking for places in the world where the production costs will be the lowest. You know, we have this LI shoring or flag shoring concepts that have emerged. But the economic assistance or cooperation outlined in the audacious initiative are something very old. We saw them already in proposals by the Lee Myung-bak administrations or other administrations. Let's make economic special zones. Let's pursue joint economic cooperation. and so on. So they need to be more audacious. And lastly, our way of approaching North Korea should be more audacious. We give them proposals, and if they refuse, that shouldn't be the end of it. We should approach North Korea in a manner that would really induce positive response from North Korea, instead of just throwing a proposal on the table and waiting for North Korea to respond. So ultimately, our goal, the goal of our policy towards North Korea is to globalize and marketize North Korea's economic system. Now, Mr. Kwon Tae-jin also talked about the importance of international cooperation, but the audacious initiative only incorporates a bilateral point of view. It should also incorporate multilateral point of view. So this audacious initiative that is being pursued by the government can be more effective only when we make the necessary works to do so, as I've just made some suggestions. And I hope that North Korea would actively respond to this initiative so as to better inter-Korean relations. Thank you very much.
So much. And now, last but not least, Dr. Lee.
예, 국토연구원의 이상준입니다. 오늘 두 분의 강태코 박사님과 김혁 박사님의
Thank you very much, our two presenters, and I would like to especially thank Mr. Kim, who could not be here with us, but I wish you good health and quick recovery. So today we are gathered here to focus on climate and agriculture and environment, and let us recall why we're talking about this topic. A lot of us talk about post-pandemic. But as Mr. Jo just said, or Professor Jo just said, if we don't change our mindset, if we don't go for a new approach, we cannot survive. We cannot ensure our survival. Before COVID-19, we were very much focused on consumption and energy consumption. If we continue to live with that system, after the pandemic, we may face a super ultra pandemic. So we have to really think about the post-pandemic era, and we have to fundamentally change how we live, how we exchange, how we interact and cooperate. As North Korea faced COVID pandemic as well, I'm sure that it had given a lot of thought to this issue as well. So what they probably learned is that, the U.S. fighters is not something that they should be afraid about, but they should be afraid about this very small and minuscule virus. So nuclear is, of course, threatening, but we have to also think about how we're going to ensure sustainable environment. And that's probably what North Korea and North Korea's leadership and Kim Jong-un should realize to ensure its regime stability. And that should be also the awakening for us. We should not really return back to the pre-COVID era. We really have to adapt ourselves to the new post-COVID era and think about how we can change our action. So that is why the issue of environment, climate, and agriculture that we are covering today is indeed a very important beginning point for addressing many different issues on the Korean Peninsula. So Mr. Kang also mentioned about how the sustainability concept should be incorporated in our policymaking. I truly agree with that. And in that sense, South Korea's DPRK policy should be geared more towards a lot of soul searching. Let me add a few more points. So Mr. Kang mentioned about the inter-Korean cooperation at the borders, and also maybe creating a consultative body at a Northeast Asian level, regional level, and all of these initiatives that are taking place in Korea, in both Koreas, I think that it is very important to identify specific tasks regarding the SDGs by both countries to further our cooperation. And Mr. Kim mentioned about some recommendations that can be introduced in the agricultural sector, and he also took stock of the North Korea's agricultural situation. And I think that food crisis and climate crisis and net zero issues are very important issues. And it is very much related also with the issue of diverse farming in North Korea. So the forestry and agriculture, putting them together. So I think that by aligning all of our initiatives, we can explore more specific cooperation opportunities. And last thing I would like to say is, as Professor Cho just said, North Korea should be more or become more audacious. I think that North Korea was very much disappointed, meaning that, there was a point in time, back in history, they thought that all the sanctions would be lifted, but they saw everything crumbling down, and probably North was very much disappointed. And maybe they might consider the South's proposal to cooperate as something very minor and trivial, but North Korea needs to change their mindset as well. We have to, they have to seek sustainable Korean Peninsula for its people, and they really have to truly think about whether they should or not cooperate with South Korea. Of course, they have big pride for their country, but what is more important is the life of their population. So in that sense, I truly wish that North Korea will respond audaciously to the proposals made by the South. And North Korea is very much interested and has been very proud to present that they're very good at remote healthcare and remote education and so forth. They have boasted that in the past. So I think that maybe we can use these remote means as the beginning part of our inter-Korean cooperation. And we in South Korea should also make preparations from now on to prepare for these human-to-human exchanges. We have the experience of running capacity building programs for developing countries. We have the expertise, we have that in Korea, so we can transfer those expertise and knowledge in the areas of agriculture and environment first. We need to provide, or the Korean government need to provide that kind of capacity building programs so that we can take a step-by-step approach in improving inter-Korean relations. Actually, from North Korea's side, they might not be truly satisfied because there is this very big issue that in their mind that is lifting, sanctions, and now we're talking about like environment cooperation and climate cooperation, so they might not really be interested. But what is important is we have to make the right first step so that we can further improve our relations. So maybe this year we can maybe start off by making contact to North Korea to reinitiate human-to-human exchanges. With that, I would like to wrap up my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have unfortunately very, very few time left, but I hope we can get answers from and thoughts from our two presenters, Dr. Kang and Dr. Kim, and finally maybe a small round of questions from the floor. Please, would you start?
네, 고맙습니다. 각 분야에서의 최고 전문가인 토론
So I would like to thank the interventions of our panelists who are the experts in their respective fields. There were things that I learned for the first time, and thank you very much for your input. I think you have made my presentation more enriching.
제가 제안을 하면 어떨까 싶었는데 이런 것들도 좀
So, of course, I think that we don't need to go for a large-scale programs or projects. Maybe we can take a small steps first to engage North Korea primarily. That will be my comments.
Thank you. And Dr. Kim?
네, 일단 토론 내용들에 서 너무 고맙고.
Thank you
진짜
so much
중요한
to all the
이야기를 많이
discussants
해주셔서
for your remarks. They
앞으로도
were very
연구하는 과정에서 많은
valuable
도움이 될
and
것
it will be very
같습니다.
helpful for
또
me in
생각지
pursuing
못했던
future
분들이 꽤
studies.
많아서
There were
너무
some things that I
행복하네요.
failed to consider,
네,
so I learned a
앞으로도
lot from
이
them.
부분에 대해서 계속해서 연구를 해나갈
And
거고
I'm
또
going to
필요한
pursue
부분들이 있으면
related studies going
끊임없이
forward.
또
So
토론자 선생님들께 자문도 좀
if
구하고
necessary,
해보겠습니다.
perhaps I
네,
can ask for some advices to our discussants later for my future studies. Thank you very much.
Oh, now both of you were very disciplined and did very well. And now we have still some time for one or two questions from the floor. Who would like to open? We have here. Please bring a microphone here. Please identify yourself and then ask the question.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much.
행사를 주관한 한국농어종사
So my name
소장을
is
맡고 있는 송종호입니다.
Song Jong-hwan from the Korea Rural Community Corporation's Rural Research Institute, the host of this session. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwang Taek-gu, Kim Hyuk, Kwon Tae-jim, Lee Sang-jin, and Cho Dong-ho for your presentations and remarks.
이 특별 세션을 5월 말에 이제 준비하면서
So while preparing for this special session in May, Dr. Kim Hyuk and I thought about what would be the best topic for this session. And we thought about what is the most important issue on the Korean Peninsula, and we decided that it's climate change as well as agricultural cooperation between the two Koreas.
몇 가지 이제 흐름을 만들었습니다.
And we developed from those two topics. First of all,
식량 수급의 불안정으로
climate crisis is expanded into food shortage, which can lead to food crisis
우리가 다 알다시피
or food insecurity issue.
공동체를 엮게
As you know, the two Koreas share the same climate.
근데 현재 뭐 국제적으로 볼 때 우크라이나 전쟁이라든가
But there is the Ukraine-Russia war today,
홍수 이런 것들
drought and flood going on all across the world, together with the sanctions against North Korea.
좀 연성 안보 측면에서 이제 조금 더 이렇게
Agricultural cooperation
통해서 조금 도출해 보자.
would be something that is very needed for both Koreas, and we wanted to dig further into this issue, and that's why we decided to have that as our topic of discussion today. And I hope that I would thank you so much for the presenters and discussants for their wonderful remarks, and I thank you on behalf of my organization.
Thank you very much for these words of background also. Do we have a question? Any other question? Or is there any more intervention from our three panelists? Well, then we are basically almost at the end of our session. I would like maybe to make one or two comments myself on that. Namely, one thing is, we always talk about the climate crisis in North Korea, but we should be also honest. Part of that is also a blame game. The North Koreans like to speak of an international climate crisis because that somehow obscures that for a lot of micro disasters, they are responsible themselves. If you think of their afforestation policy, very good, but before they cut down the forest, that brings flooding. That's one of the major reasons. And there are other things, the way they handle agriculture is a problem. The second thing is there is no cooperation with North Korea. That was very well said, and it's a little bit sad. I think for you, a long time living here and working on that cooperation must be so frustrating. I don't know who said that. It's like a harassment. You are harassing the North Koreans really, and phone them every month and say, "Wouldn't you come again for a date?" And they always say no, and they say it in very bad words. But on the other hand, first of all, there's always this cycle. In 2017, had we said here, we had said the same thing. North Koreans don't want to have anything to do with us. But a few months later, suddenly they opened up. So the hope should not be gone. There can be a time of cooperation again. And hopefully it will be one when then the concepts you develop will set in and it gets more sustainable. And also, there are some good examples. There's Pyongyang Kwakide, which has also an agricultural faculty, which worked quite well. Though it was formally an international project, there are other international projects. So the trilateral or international approach would be, I think, more important. And I think that was said before also, to develop a Northeast Asian mechanism. It's much easier than to get cooperation from the North also. And last but not least, Dr. Lee said, the most important is the life of the population. But unfortunately, it might well be that the leadership has a very different view of that. Because the North Koreans have not the same calculation like you. You say we should work together. Yeah, from your point of view, from our point of view, it's logical to say it's the best benefit for the population. But if you don't care for the benefit, and when we opened the East German archives after unification, we found also the reports on the visit of Kim Il-sung to East Germany. That must have been somewhere in the 1980s or late 1970s. And at one point he said basically, only a hungry communist is a good communist. He said it in little different words, but he said basically, there's no problem if there's a crisis. If the people are too happy, if the life is too good, they're not good communists anymore. And I think that's also, we have to recognize that they have maybe a very different view on the incentives. And then we come back to the audacious initiative. What's audacious for them? It might be not so attractive for them as it sounds for us, even if you spend a lot of money on it or offer a lot of money. I thank all of you very much, especially Dr. Kim, who did very well and in a very good voice, Dr. Kang, and our three presenters, Dr. Kang, Professor Zhou, and Dr. Lee. And I hope we can continue this cooperation and this discussion. Dr. Kwon already promised us his thoughts in the future, and we will see again maybe in 1 year, and maybe there are real cooperation projects. That would be my hope for the future. Thank you very much. 감사합니다. And everybody in the audience too. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the moderator, the presenters, and the discussants. That concludes session 8-1. Next session will take place starting from 3:30 p.m. We ask for your participation. Thank you.